At first light, the great estates of 1950s America seemed less like houses than private kingdoms. Across the green hills of Long Island, behind limestone gates and walls softened by ivy, enormous mansions stood at the ends of drives so long that visitors could not see the front door from the public road. In Newport, Rhode Island, marble palaces faced the Atlantic, their terraces suspended above cold grey water. In Palm Beach, Mediterranean villas hid behind palms, flowering hedges, and guarded entrances. Above Los Angeles, the estates of Bel Air and Beverly Hills glowed in the dry California sun, surrounded by swimming pools, tennis courts, guest houses, citrus gardens, and lawns kept unnaturally green in a landscape that wanted to become desert. The richest families did not simply own homes, they owned controlled environments. A visitor approaching one of these properties might pass through iron gates opened by a uniformed guard, continue beneath rows of elms or eucalyptus trees, circle a fountain imported from Europe, and arrive beneath a covered entrance large enough to shelter several automobiles. A chauffeur would step forward, a footman might open the car door. Somewhere beyond the entrance hall, unseen maids were already moving through bedrooms, polishing silver, carrying breakfast trays, replacing flowers, and preparing rooms for people who might not enter them all day. America in the 1950s often presented itself as a nation of ordinary abundance. Television advertisements showed smiling families purchasing refrigerators, washing machines, automobiles, and suburban homes. Returning servicemen entered colleges with help from the GI Bill. New highways spread across the country. Factories that had once produced tanks and bombers now produced cars, televisions, kitchen appliances, and consumer goods in quantities the world had never seen. But above this broad landscape of post-war prosperity lived a narrow society whose wealth existed on an entirely different scale. These were the heirs of railroads, oil fields, steel mills, tobacco companies, newspapers, banks, mines, department stores, real estate empires, chemical firms, and food corporations. They were also the new industrialists, corporate executives, hotel owners, movie producers, oil wildcatters, defense contractors, entertainers, and financiers who had risen during the war and the economic expansion that followed it. Some belonged to families whose names had been printed on buildings, universities, museums, and railroad cars for generations. Others had become rich so quickly that old society treated them with suspicion. The old money families spoke quietly, dressed conservatively, and often insisted that wealth should remain invisible. The new rich built larger swimming pools, purchased brighter automobiles, threw louder parties, and allowed photographers through the gates. Yet whether the fortune was old or new, life at the top was governed by one central fact. Almost every ordinary inconvenience could be transferred to someone else. The wealthy did not wake to alarm clocks unless they wished to. They did not search for clean shirts, prepare breakfast, answer every telephone call, carry luggage, wash dishes, repair a broken pipe, stand in line for tickets, or worry about whether a guest room was ready. A network of employees absorbed the friction of daily existence. In the largest homes, the day began below stairs before sunrise. The household staff might include a butler, housekeeper, cook, assistant cooks, kitchen maids, chambermaids, laundresses, gardeners, chauffeurs, secretaries, governesses, nurses, handymen, security guards, and seasonal workers. Some estates employed dozens. Others maintained smaller permanent staffs, but expanded dramatically during parties, holidays, or summer residence. The language of service remained formal. Employees often addressed the owners as Sir, Madam, or by title. The owners might know the senior servants well, especially a long-time butler or housekeeper, yet intimacy had limits. A servant could be present during marriages, births, illnesses, arguments, affairs, and funerals, while remaining almost invisible in the official story of the family. The best servants were expected to anticipate needs before those needs were expressed. A bedroom fireplace was lit before its occupant entered. Bath water appeared at the preferred temperature. Clothes were brushed, pressed, and arranged in sequence. Newspapers were folded to expose the pages most likely to be read. A favourite breakfast might be prepared even when the owner had not requested it. Drinks arrived before the guest realised that the glass was empty. The richest households valued silence. Doors were opened without noise. Trays appeared and disappeared. Ashtrays were replaced before becoming full. Shoes returned polished. Automobiles waited with engines already warm. To live magnificently was to move through a world in which the labour supporting magnificence remained out of sight. The master bedroom of a 1950s estate could resemble a private hotel suite. There might be separate dressing rooms for husband and wife, adjoining bathrooms faced in marble, closets designed like small boutiques, sitting rooms, private terraces, and telephones connected to household extensions. In colder regions, fur coats occupied cedar-lined storage rooms. Evening clothes were kept apart from country clothes, city clothes, riding clothes, yachting clothes, and travel clothes. The wealthy changed clothing more often than most Americans changed locations. A man might appear at breakfast in a robe, dress for the office or club, change for golf, change again for cocktails, and wear black tie or white tie for dinner. A woman moving through high society could require different outfits for breakfast, shopping, luncheon, afternoon visits, cocktails, dinner, dancing, charity events, sporting occasions, and travel. The most privileged women bought from Paris couture houses or from American designers who understood the codes of elite society. Their dresses were fitted personally, their gloves matched their handbags, their shoes were selected for particular rooms and occasions. Their jewellery might arrive from a vault shortly before dinner and return there before midnight. Diamonds were not always displayed carelessly. Old wealth often preferred understatement in daylight. A woman might wear pearls that appeared modest but were worth more than a suburban neighbourhood. A bracelet might have belonged to a European princess. A brooch might contain stones purchased during the 19th century, reset several times, and passed through generations without ever appearing in a public inventory. In some families, jewellery was treated almost like a family employee, summoned for important occasions, carefully supervised, insured, inspected, and returned to secure storage. Breakfast revealed the difference between comfort and wealth. For an ordinary American family, breakfast might mean coffee, toast, eggs, or cereal, eaten quickly before school and work. In a great house, breakfast could be served in a sunroom overlooking gardens or delivered privately on a silver tray. There might be fresh fruit, eggs prepared to precise instructions, pastries, smoked fish, grilled tomatoes, bacon, juice, coffee, tea, and newspapers from several cities. Yet wealth did not always mean excess at every meal. Many members of old families ate simply in private. The performance of abundance was often reserved for guests. A billionaire might begin the day with grapefruit and coffee, while maintaining a kitchen capable of serving dinner to 200 people. Behind the simplicity stood complexity. The grapefruit had been selected, cut, and chilled. The silver had been polished. The coffee had been ground. The tray cloth had been pressed. The room had been warmed. The newspapers had been collected. The flowers had been replaced. Several people might have worked so that one person could describe breakfast as effortless. Afterward, the men of the family often disappeared into offices, clubs, boardrooms, or libraries. The 1950s were an age of large corporations and concentrated executive power. Industrial leaders sat on interlocking boards. Bankers financed railroads, utilities, oil exploration, construction, and defense production. A small number of men could influence employment, investment, and development across entire regions. They travelled between private offices lined with wood panelling, exclusive dining rooms, and clubs where major decisions were discussed away from reporters and shareholders. Formal meetings mattered, but so did the quiet lunch, the weekend shooting party, the golf game, the yacht cruise, and the conversation after dinner when no secretary was taking notes. Membership in the right club could be more valuable than a public title. In New York, private clubs offered dining rooms, libraries, bedrooms, squash courts, card rooms, barber services, and spaces where wealthy men could meet without interruption. In other cities, elite clubs performed similar functions. The architecture suggested tradition. Dark wood, leather chairs, portraits of founders, fireplaces, thick carpets, and employees trained to remember names and preferences. These institutions were not merely luxurious, they were filters. They determined who could enter the social and business circles where influence circulated. Membership could depend on family, school, religion, race, reputation, and sponsorship by existing members. Many clubs excluded Jewish Americans, Black Americans, women, and people whose fortunes were considered too new or socially inconvenient. The richest America celebrated freedom while maintaining private systems of exclusion. A man could own factories employing thousands and still be rejected by an old club because of his ancestry. A celebrated entertainer could perform at a private event, but not be accepted as an equal guest. A black musician might fill a ballroom with music while being directed to use a service entrance. The polished surfaces of elite society depended on invisible boundaries as carefully maintained as the hedges surrounding an estate. For wealthy women, the day followed a different but equally structured map. Some managed charitable foundations, political relationships, artistic collections, and complicated households. Others were expected to represent the family through appearance, hospitality, and social discipline. A successful society hostess did far more than choose flowers and seating arrangements. She maintained alliances. She knew which guests must not be placed together. She understood who had recently divorced, whose business was failing, whose daughter was engaged, whose husband was having an affair, who had become politically dangerous, and who was useful despite being disliked. The seating chart at a formal dinner could reflect the architecture of power. A senator might be placed near an industrialist. A museum director might sit beside a potential donor. A foreign diplomat could be introduced to a banker. A newspaper publisher might receive a privileged position near the hostess. A newly rich guest could be included, but placed far enough from the centre to understand the limits of acceptance. The table itself was theatre. In a grand dining room, servants placed multiple forks, knives, spoons, crystal glasses, bread plates, finger bowls, and individual salt dishes, according to rules inherited from European aristocratic practice. Candles reflected in polished silver. Flowers were arranged low enough not to block conversation. Place cards prevented uncertainty. The butler directed service through glances and small movements. Dinner might begin with cocktails in a drawing room, where the furniture appeared casually arranged, but every object had been considered. Guests stood beneath paintings acquired in Paris, London, Florence, or New York. Some owners understood their collections deeply. Others purchased art as confirmation that they belonged among people who owned important things. A Picasso, Renoir, Sargent, or Old Master could function as beauty, investment, inheritance, and social signal at the same time. The cocktails of the era were strong and constant. Martinis, Manhattans, highballs, whiskey, gin, and champagne lubricated elite social life. Drinking began before dinner and continued afterward. Cigarettes appeared everywhere, in drawing rooms, offices, bedrooms, automobiles, restaurants, private aircraft, and beside swimming pools. Silver cigarette boxes sat open on tables. Crystal ashtrays occupied every seating area. A host who failed to provide cigarettes would have seemed unprepared. The air of a fashionable gathering could be thick with smoke, perfume, alcohol, and the scent of flowers forced to bloom out of season. Conversation moved between politics, gossip, art, money, marriage, travel, and scandal. People spoke about Europe as though it were a seasonal extension of the East Coast. They discussed Paris dressmakers, Swiss schools, Italian villas, English country houses, Caribbean resorts, and Mediterranean yachts. The truly rich did not take vacations in the modern sense. They moved between residences. Winter might be spent in Palm Beach, California, or the Caribbean. Spring brought New York dinners, Washington events, or European travel. Summer belonged to Newport, Bar Harbor, the Hamptons, private camps in the Adirondacks, ranches in the West, or estates on lakes and islands. Autumn might involve hunting, horse shows, political gatherings, and country weekends. Each residence had to be opened before the family arrived. Rooms were aired, linens were unpacked, silver was inspected, cars were serviced, boats were prepared, gardens were restored, wine cellars were checked, local employees were hired, food was ordered. The house came alive before the owners crossed the threshold. The family might arrive by train, chauffeured automobile, private aircraft, or yacht, carrying trunks of clothing and accompanied by children, nurses, secretaries, dogs, and personal staff. Their movement created temporary economies. Florists, caterers, stable workers, boat crews, decorators, builders, musicians, dressmakers, photographers, and local merchants depended on the seasons of the wealthy. A single estate could employ families across generations. In towns near elite resorts, the arrival of summer residents changed traffic, prices, employment, and the rhythm of daily life. The grandest estates were expensive even when no one was living in them. Roofs leaked, stone cracked, pipes froze, salt air damaged metal. Formal gardens demanded constant labour, pools required treatment, horses required care every day. Heating a 100-room mansion could cost a fortune. Taxes rose. Servants became harder to recruit after the Second World War, when new employment opportunities made domestic service less attractive to many Americans. By the 1950s, some symbols of the Gilded Age were already becoming burdens. The enormous Newport cottages built by Vanderbilts, Astors, and other industrial families remained spectacular, but the social system that had created them was weakening. Federal income taxes, estate taxes, maintenance costs, changing labour markets, and divided inheritances made it difficult for later generations to preserve properties designed for an earlier age. The top federal income tax rate during much of the decade exceeded 90%, although deductions, capital gains treatment, trusts, corporate structures, and other legal strategies meant that the very rich rarely surrendered $9 of every 10 they earned. Still, the financial environment differed sharply from that of the Gilded Age. Families hired teams of lawyers, accountants, bankers, and trustees to preserve fortunes. Money was moved into foundations, trusts, holding companies, insurance arrangements, real estate, art, securities, and family partnerships. Wealth could be divided on paper while remaining coordinated in practice. A mansion might belong to a trust. A yacht might belong to a corporation. A collection might be promised to a museum while remaining in the owner's home. The management of great wealth became an industry. Private bankers knew family histories. Attorneys understood marriages and rivalries. Accountants tracked investments across states and countries. Secretaries handled invitations, correspondence, travel, and charitable requests. Estate managers negotiated with contractors and local officials. Public relations advisors protected reputations. The richest person in a room was often surrounded by people whose full-time job was preventing the outside world from reaching him directly. Consider the arrival of a telephone call. In an ordinary household, the telephone rang and someone answered. In a wealthy home, calls could pass through a switchboard, secretary, assistant, or butler. The caller might be asked to identify himself, state his purpose, and wait while someone decided whether the conversation should occur. Privacy itself was a luxury. A famous industrialist or heiress could disappear behind employees and gates. Reporters might know the location of the estate without knowing what happened inside. Photographs were often controlled. Interviews were negotiated. Scandals could sometimes be contained through relationships with editors, lawyers, police officials, and business partners. But the 1950s also brought a new and dangerous object into the drawing room: television. Television changed how Americans imagined wealth. Millions could now see Hollywood homes, celebrity weddings, society events, political hearings, and advertisements displaying lifestyles just beyond reach. The rich were no longer distant names in newspaper columns. They became moving images. Some embraced the exposure, others feared it. Old money had survived partly through discretion. Television rewarded personality, glamour, controversy, and visibility. A hotel owner like Conrad Hilton could become a public symbol of expansion and luxury. Movie stars transformed private consumption into spectacle. Fashion photographers turned society women into national icons. Gossip columnists converted marriages and parties into entertainment for readers who would never enter the rooms being described. The relationship between wealth and fame began to change. In earlier generations, many rich Americans had wanted status without public scrutiny. By the 1950s, celebrity itself could create wealth, and wealth could create celebrity. Hollywood actors, singers, producers, and studio executives entered social spaces once dominated by inherited fortunes. Yet Hollywood wealth looked different from East Coast wealth. In Beverly Hills and Bel Air, estates could be theatrical. Houses combined Georgian facades, Spanish courtyards, French interiors, modern glass walls, Roman fountains, and swimming pools shaped like lagoons. Film stars built projection rooms, bars, dressing suites, guest cottages, dance floors, and private salons. The climate allowed a new kind of luxury. Outdoor living performed as spectacle. Breakfast could be served beside a pool in January. Guests drank cocktails beneath palm trees. Tennis matches continued through winter. Convertibles moved along wide boulevards under a hard blue sky. At night, the lights of Los Angeles spread below hillside terraces like an electric ocean. A Hollywood party mixed directors, actors, musicians, agents, producers, political figures, and wealthy outsiders who wanted proximity to fame. The guest list could include people whom an old New York hostess would have considered socially impossible. But glamour did not erase control. The studio system still shaped careers, appearances, romances, and scandals. Contracts could regulate an actor's behavior. Publicists created stories. Photographers were invited or excluded. Marriages could be encouraged for publicity. Affairs, addictions, illnesses, and sexuality were managed when possible and weaponized when necessary. The mansions were full of beautiful rooms and frightened people. A star's income might be enormous, yet unstable. Popularity could vanish. A scandal could destroy a career. A studio executive could stop returning calls. A younger face could appear. The swimming pool, sports car, and diamond necklace were not only rewards. They were evidence that success had occurred, and reminders that it might end. In the East, inherited wealth carried a different anxiety: decline. Families that had once dominated American industry now watched professional managers take greater control of corporations. Fortunes divided among children and grandchildren. Some heirs remained powerful. Others possessed famous names, but less money than the public imagined. A person could live in a mansion and struggle to maintain it. Curtains faded in unused rooms. Entire wings were closed during winter. Paintings were quietly sold. Silver disappeared at auction. Gardens became smaller. A ballroom built for 500 guests might host a family dinner for 6. The exterior still projected permanence, but inside, the house was retreating. This contrast was visible on Long Island's Gold Coast, where grand estates had spread across the North Shore during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. By the 1950s, many faced demolition or subdivision. Land once maintained as private parkland became housing developments, schools, institutions, or golf courses. The American dream of suburban home ownership advanced through the ruins of aristocratic landscape. A single estate might be divided into hundreds of middle-class properties. The gates disappeared, roads crossed former lawns, kitchens stood where horses had been exercised. Children rode bicycles across land where servants had once carried invitations between houses. The old rich had built walls against the city. The post-war suburbs climbed through them. Yet some families still lived with extraordinary scale. Marjorie Merriweather Post, heiress to the Post's serial fortune and one of the most famous hostesses of the era, moved among magnificent residences, including Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach and Hillwood in Washington. Her houses were not simply private retreats. They were stages for diplomacy, philanthropy, society, and cultural display. At a grand dinner, the household might serve guests from porcelain, silver, crystal, and linens collected across decades. Musicians performed, flowers arrived by the truckload. Diplomats, politicians, military officers, industrialists, and society figures passed through rooms filled with French and Russian art. The hostess operated at the center of the machine. She reviewed menus, guest lists, flowers, schedules, and protocol. Her wealth allowed the evening to appear effortless, but the effort was real and organized. Elite hospitality functioned almost like a private government ministry, coordinating transportation, security, food, seating, entertainment, and personal relationships. Doris Duke represented another form of immense inherited wealth. Known publicly as the richest girl in the world, she inherited a tobacco fortune and lived among estates, art collections, gardens, travel, and public fascination. Her wealth created freedom unavailable to most women, but it also created isolation. Every friendship could be questioned. Every romance attracted scrutiny. Every employee possessed access to private information. To be enormously rich was to wonder whether affection could be trusted. The public imagined unlimited choice. In private, wealth could narrow the world. The heiress might travel anywhere, yet never know whether she had been welcomed for herself. She could purchase privacy, yet become a permanent object of curiosity. She could escape ordinary dependence while becoming dependent on advisors, staff, lawyers, and protectors. J. Paul Getty embodied the image of the self-made oil billionaire. His fortune expanded through aggressive investment and oil concessions, and he became one of the most famous wealthy Americans of the century. Getty surrounded himself with art and historic architecture, eventually making Sutton Place in England one of his principal residences. His life demonstrated that vast wealth did not necessarily produce warmth, generosity, or peace. The public often expected the richest man to behave like a king. Getty behaved like a businessman who continued measuring costs even after cost had lost ordinary meaning. Stories of his frugality became part of his legend. They fascinated the public because they violated the expected performance of wealth. A billionaire could purchase art, property, and industrial assets on an enormous scale, while remaining suspicious of personal expense. This was one of the central paradoxes of the very rich. They did not always experience money as abundance. Some experienced it as competition, others as security, others as proof of intelligence, family superiority, divine favor, or personal survival. A person could possess hundreds of millions of dollars and remain terrified of being cheated out of a small sum. Howard Hughes represented wealth transformed into secrecy. Aviation pioneer, industrialist, film producer, and obsessive controller, Hughes moved through the 1950s as both public legend and increasingly private mystery. He had access to aircraft, hotels, studios, engineers, doctors, actresses, lawyers, and political influence. Yet his wealth enabled withdrawal. Most people who become isolated are eventually forced back into contact by economic necessity. Hughes could construct layers between himself and the world. Employees followed elaborate instructions. Rooms could be controlled. Objects could be handled according to rituals. Communications passed through intermediaries. The fortune made his fears easier to obey. Wealth did not cure obsession. It built architecture around it. The Rockefeller family represented something broader than personal luxury. Their fortune had become an American institution. By the 1950s, Rockefellers were involved in banking, philanthropy, politics, conservation, international affairs, real estate, and cultural organizations. Their name appeared on foundations, projects, and buildings. They moved between private estates and public responsibilities. Members of the family cultivated an image of disciplined service rather than uncontrolled indulgence. Yet Rockefeller life remained protected by extraordinary resources. Private compounds, household staff, advisors, offices, security, and family institutions allowed them to move through public life without experiencing it like ordinary citizens. A Rockefeller could campaign, govern, collect art, support universities, or promote conservation while supported by systems created through generations of concentrated wealth. The family understood that legitimacy required more than possession. The age of the openly ruthless robber baron had damaged the public image of great fortunes. 20th century wealth needed a moral language. Philanthropy provided it. Foundations funded medicine, education, scientific research, museums, public health, international programs, and the arts. Libraries, hospitals, universities, and cultural institutions benefited from private fortunes. Some projects produced profound public good, but philanthropy also preserved influence. The donor selected the cause. The foundation defined priorities. Trustees decided which ideas deserved support. Wealth that had been accumulated through private enterprise re-entered society under terms shaped by the family that possessed it. A new museum wing could be generous and self-memorializing at the same time. The same was true of charity balls. Elite women organized events for hospitals, children's organizations, cultural institutions, and relief campaigns. Ballrooms filled with gowns, white dinner jackets, orchestras, photographers, and flowers. Tickets and donations raised substantial sums. The event displayed compassion through luxury. A society page might show a jeweled hostess beneath a chandelier, raising money for families who could never afford medical treatment. The contradiction was obvious, but also normalized. Extravagance became acceptable when connected to charity. The rich did not merely give money, they turned giving into a social season. Invitations confirmed rank. Committees established alliances. Photographs preserved visibility. A successful event raised funds, strengthened institutions, enhanced reputations, and reminded the city who occupied its highest social platform. In New York, the wealthy moved through a vertical landscape. Unlike the sprawling estates of Long Island or California, Manhattan wealth often occupied penthouses, duplexes, and enormous apartments above Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, and Central Park. Elevators opened into private foyers. Staff used separate entrances and service corridors. Dining rooms faced the city. Libraries and galleries stretched across multiple rooms. The richest apartments functioned like country houses stacked in the sky. A family could maintain 20 or 30 rooms, several fireplaces, servants' quarters, wine storage, dressing rooms, a private elevator landing, and galleries large enough for receptions. Windows overlooked Central Park or the Avenue. Noise from the street became distant. Downstairs, doormen controlled access. They called taxis, carried packages, recognized visitors, received deliveries, and protected residents from unwanted contact. Building staff understood schedules and secrets. They knew who returned late, who slept elsewhere, which marriage was collapsing, and which visitor should never be announced loudly. Privacy depended on loyalty. Inside, the decoration could be traditional, modern, or deliberately international. French furniture, English paintings, Chinese porcelain, American art, antique rugs, modern sculpture, and custom fabrics shared space. Designers worked with clients for months or years. A room was expected to appear collected rather than purchased all at once. Old money disliked the look of effort. Furniture should suggest inheritance, travel, taste, and gradual accumulation. A new millionaire who ordered an entire room from one showroom risked ridicule, even if every object was expensive. Taste was a language used to distinguish the established rich from the merely wealthy. The correct chair, flower arrangement, painting, dog breed, accent, school, and vacation destination communicated belonging. Rules were rarely written, but violations were noticed. Money could purchase the objects, it could not always purchase fluency. This was why the new rich hired decorators, social secretaries, tutors, and advisors. They learned which invitations mattered, how to address titled Europeans, how to dress for country weekends, how much jewelry to wear, and when not to mention money. The old rich considered open discussion of money vulgar, although their entire world was constructed by it. A family might discuss trusts, stocks, taxes, property, and inheritance in private offices. then pretend at dinner that wealth was an incidental background condition. One did not announce the price of a painting. One did not boast about the cost of a house. One allowed others to recognize quality. New money often violated this silence. Oil fortunes in Texas created a culture of wealth that could be larger, brighter, and more direct. Successful oilmen built enormous ranch houses, purchased aircraft, commissioned jewelry, hosted barbecues for hundreds, and displayed confidence in industries that seemed capable of producing money from the ground itself. Texas wealth combined business, politics, land, and myth. The oilman was presented as a gambler who had risked everything on a drilling site and won. His fortune appeared dynamic rather than inherited. He might wear expensive boots instead of formal English shoes, but the informality concealed real power. A gathering at a Texas ranch could include politicians, judges, contractors, bankers, and energy executives. Deals were discussed beside cattle, aircraft, and swimming pools. The scale of the landscape made eastern estates seem confined. Private aviation became an especially important symbol of post-war wealth. Before widespread commercial jet travel, the ability to own or charter an aircraft dramatically changed personal geography. Industrialists and celebrities could move between factories, ranches, resorts, and cities without depending entirely on airline schedules. The aircraft was not always luxurious by modern standards. Cabins could be noisy, cramped, and affected by weather, but the real luxury was control. The passenger decided when to leave, whom to bring, and where to land. Assistants handled luggage and arrangements. Automobiles waited at the destination. A trip that required planning for an ordinary family became a command. For the very rich, distance began to lose authority. Yachts performed a similar function on water. A large yacht required a captain, engineers, deckhands, cooks, stewards, maintenance, fuel, docking arrangements, and constant repair. It was an expensive machine designed to create the sensation of effortless freedom. Guests arrived with small luggage because most needs were already anticipated. Cabins contained fresh linens and flowers. Meals appeared on deck. Launches carried passengers ashore. The coastline became a sequence of private views. But yachts also revealed hierarchy with unusual clarity. Owners and guests occupied polished decks and dining spaces. Crew members slept in tighter quarters and remained on duty. The vessel's elegance depended on discipline below. A yacht could be a floating estate, but it was also a workplace from which employees could not go home at night. The same division shaped life in private railroad cars, hunting lodges, and island compounds. The rich travelled with service. Their luggage might arrive before them. Rooms were prepared to resemble familiar environments. Favourite foods, drinks, cigarettes, flowers, and newspapers could be obtained in distant places. Personal comfort was exported. Even adventure could be organised. A wealthy hunting party in the West might appear rugged in photographs. Men in boots beside horses, rifles, campfires, and mountains. Outside the frame, guides, cooks, drivers, and local workers created the experience. The guests encountered nature after others had negotiated the difficult parts. At the same time, some wealthy Americans genuinely embraced physical challenge. They sailed, rowed, hunted, skied, climbed, raced automobiles, and piloted aircraft. Wealth provided access to training, equipment, and time, but it did not eliminate danger. A fall from a horse injured a rich body like any other. The difference came afterward. Private physicians could be summoned. Specialists could be consulted. Recovery could take place in a quiet residence with nurses and servants. Work could be postponed. Privacy could be protected. The rich often received not only better medical attention, but a different experience of illness. Hospitals were avoided when possible. Procedures might occur in private rooms, or even private homes. Doctors made house calls. Nurses remained day and night. Meals, visitors, lighting, and information were controlled. A diagnosis that threatened a working-class family with lost wages could become a private interruption for a wealthy one. This did not mean the rich were safe from disease. The decade remained medically limited by modern standards. Cancer, heart disease, stroke, infection, mental illness, and addiction crossed every gate. But suffering surrounded by service looked different from suffering surrounded by debt. Mental illness was especially hidden. Families could send relatives to private clinics, distant estates, European doctors, or quiet rooms in large houses. Public explanations referred to exhaustion, travel, or nervous collapse. Records might be sealed, newspapers might cooperate. A troubled heir could vanish without losing the family name. For ordinary Americans, mental illness often brought stigma, institutionalization, economic crisis, and public exposure. The wealthy could purchase silence, though not necessarily recovery. Alcoholism moved through elite society under the cover of ritual. Drinking was woven into lunch, cocktails, dinner, nightclubs, travel, and weekends. A person could consume enormous amounts without appearing to violate social custom until behavior became impossible to ignore. Servants cleaned the broken glass. Chauffeurs prevented crashes. Secretaries cancelled appointments. Doctors prescribed rest. Friends protected reputations. Money softened consequences long enough for damage to deepen. Prescription drugs entered the same world. Sedatives, stimulants, sleeping pills, and pain medication could be obtained through private physicians. A society woman might take one pill to sleep, another to wake, and alcohol to move through the evening. The public saw posture, diamonds, and composure. The bedroom staff saw trembling hands. Marriage among the wealthy combined affection, strategy, family expectation, money, and law. A suitable marriage joined names, fortunes, properties, and networks. Even in the 1950s, when romantic love dominated popular culture, elite families remained attentive to background. Religion, school, reputation, ancestry, and social competence mattered. A wedding could become a public declaration that two systems of power had agreed to cooperate. The ceremony might take place in a prominent church, followed by a reception at an estate or club. Newspapers reported the family connections of bride and groom. Photographs displayed the gown, attendants, flowers, and cake. Behind the celebration stood attorneys. Trusts, settlements, property rights, and inheritance arrangements shaped the union. Divorce could become financial warfare, especially when reputations, children, and corporate interests were involved. The rich had more freedom to leave unhappy marriages than people without money, but they also had more assets to fight over. Society treated divorce unevenly. Hollywood normalized repeated marriage, while old families could remain cautious. A divorced woman might continue to receive invitations if she possessed enough charm, money, or influence. Another could be quietly excluded. Men usually survived scandal more easily. A wealthy husband might maintain affairs that were known but not publicly acknowledged. Hotels, private apartments, business trips, yachts, and staff made secrecy possible. Wives often understood more than they admitted. The preservation of the marriage could matter more than fidelity. Divorce threatened family alliances, religious expectations, children's inheritance, and social stability. Couples sometimes occupied separate bedrooms, separate floors, separate homes, or separate lives while continuing to appear together at important events. A photograph could preserve a marriage that no longer existed. Women of immense wealth lived with both privilege and restriction. They could travel, collect art, finance causes, employ staff, and influence institutions. Yet social expectations remained narrow. A woman who appeared too ambitious risked being called unfeminine. A wife whose husband behaved badly might still be blamed for failing to maintain the household. Even powerful women were expected to perform ease. They remembered birthdays, managed invitations, supported charities, selected gifts, supervised children, maintained houses, protected husbands, and appeared beautifully dressed while claiming that none of it required effort. Some rebelled through affairs, travel, artistic patronage, political work, or refusal to marry. Others used widowhood as liberation. A widow with control of a fortune often possessed more independence than a married woman whose wealth remained managed by male relatives or trustees. The heiress could be richer than her husband and still be treated as financially incompetent. Trustees controlled distributions, lawyers approved transactions, Family offices monitored spending. The legal structures designed to protect wealth could also restrict the person whose name appeared on it. Children grew up inside these systems before they understood them. A child in a great house might wake in a nursery suite supervised by a nurse or governess. Meals could be taken separately from adults. Parents appeared at scheduled times. Tutors taught languages, music, riding, manners, and school subjects. The household staff often knew the children more intimately than their parents did. A nurse comforted them at night. A chauffeur heard school complaints. A governess supervised homework. A cook remembered favourite foods. Parents entered for affection, discipline, photographs, or formal meals. Some wealthy childhoods were warm and attentive. Others were emotionally distant despite constant human presence. The child was never alone, yet could feel abandoned. Education followed predetermined routes. Elite boarding schools connected children to families with similar backgrounds. Friendships formed there could later become business partnerships, political alliances, marriages, and club memberships. The school taught more than academics. It taught confidence around authority, familiarity with institutions, and the expectation that leadership belonged naturally to people like them. Students learned how to speak, dress, compete, and recover from failure without imagining that failure would become permanent. A poor student feared losing opportunity. A rich student often expected another opportunity to appear. This cushion shaped personality. Some heirs became bold, experimental, and public-spirited because they could take risks. Others became reckless because consequences seemed unreal. Cars were crashed, gambling debts were paid, academic failures were managed. Arrests could disappear through lawyers and influence. The family name operated like invisible armor. But armor could become a burden. Children of famous families knew that personal achievement might always be dismissed as inherited advantage. They were compared with parents and grandparents. Some entered the family business, others fled into art, travel, politics, religion, or self-destruction. The question followed them everywhere. What had they done that the money had not already done for them? Coming-of-age rituals marked entry into elite society. Debutante balls introduced young women through carefully organized events. White gowns, gloves, escorts, orchestras, receiving lines, and formal announcements transformed adolescence into public presentation. The language emphasized tradition. The function included marriage. A debut placed a young woman within the visible network of eligible families. Her appearance, manners, ancestry, and associations became open to evaluation. The event could feel glamorous, but it was also a form of inspection. Young men faced their own expectations. They attended suitable schools, joined clubs, served in the military or entered business, and learned to carry the family name without embarrassing it. The Second World War and Korean War complicated privilege. Some wealthy sons served in dangerous conditions. Others obtained safer assignments through education, influence, or chance. Military service could temporarily place different classes in the same uniform, but equality remained incomplete. A rich officer returned to family connections, property, and opportunity. A working-class veteran returned to wages, rent, and uncertainty. The GI Bill widened access to education and housing, helping create an enormous middle class. Yet its benefits were distributed through institutions shaped by segregation and discrimination. Black veterans often encountered barriers to mortgages, colleges, and neighborhoods. The same decade that celebrated national prosperity preserved racial inequality through law, custom, finance, and violence. The estates of the rich did not exist outside this system. Domestic service in American households had long depended heavily on women, immigrants, and black workers. In the South and in many northern cities, black women worked as maids, cooks, laundresses, and nurses in white homes, while being denied equal access to housing, education, voting, and public facilities. A black maid might enter the most luxurious rooms in America every day and return at night to a neighborhood deprived of investment by discriminatory policy. She polished silver worth more than her annual salary. She cared for children who would inherit wealth while worrying about her own children's schools. She prepared food in kitchens larger than her home. The intimacy of domestic labour did not produce equality. Employers sometimes described servants as part of the family, a phrase that could express affection while concealing low wages, long hours, and lack of power. Family members could leave. Employees could be dismissed. The servant knew the difference. Live-in employees surrendered control over time. A day off might begin after breakfast duties and end before evening preparations. Privacy was limited. Romance and family life became difficult. A maid's room could be narrow, hot, and located near the back stairs, even when the guest rooms were enormous. The Great House contained two standards of space. Front rooms were designed for comfort and display. Service areas were designed for efficiency. Guests moved through wide halls. Employees used narrow passages. Owners climbed grand staircases. Servants used back stairs. Architecture taught hierarchy without speaking. In some houses, bells connected rooms to service panels. A numbered light indicated where assistance was required. The owner pressed a button. Somewhere below, a worker looked up. Technology extended command. The 1950s brought new appliances into wealthy kitchens, but appliances did not eliminate staff. Commercial refrigerators, freezers, dishwashers, mixers, warming ovens, and intercom systems allowed more elaborate service. A modern kitchen might look almost industrial. Meals for large gatherings required planning days in advance. Fish, meat, produce, wine, flowers, and specialty ingredients arrived through service entrances. The chef or cook coordinated timing. Assistants chopped, stirred, baked, washed, and plated. The guests saw a finished dish for several minutes. The kitchen experienced it for hours. French cuisine retained prestige, but American luxury also embraced steaks, seafood, elaborate salads, canapés, soufflés, chilled soups, moulded dishes, and desserts constructed for visual effect. Caviar and champagne signalled international sophistication. Lobster suggested coastal abundance. Prime beef confirmed post-war prosperity. At informal gatherings, the wealthy sometimes performed simplicity. A barbecue at a ranch, clam bake on a beach, picnic beside a pool, or buffet in a garden allowed guests to imagine escape from formality. But informality required its own staff, equipment, and planning. The millionaire held a paper plate because someone else had prepared everything on it. Food waste could be substantial. Banquets demanded more than guests could consume. Kitchens prepared backups. Perfect fruit was selected while imperfect pieces were discarded or redirected to staff meals. Yet not every wealthy household was careless. Some owners monitored costs closely, saved leftovers, and enforced strict kitchen rules. The scale of the fortune did not predict generosity. A cook might serve truffles at dinner and be forbidden to take home unused bread. Servants judged employers by details invisible to society pages, whether wages arrived on time, whether time off was respected, whether sick employees received help, whether the owner shouted, whether children were cruel, whether leftover food could be shared, and whether Christmas bonuses reflected the labour of the year. A family celebrated for public charity could be despised below stairs. The household was a small political system. Senior servants controlled junior servants. The butler and housekeeper possessed authority derived from proximity to the owners. Rivalries formed. Information circulated. Employees protected one another or competed for favour. The servants' hall had its own etiquette, jokes, resentments, and judgments. The family imagined itself observed only by guests. In reality, the staff saw everything. They knew which paintings were copies, which bills were unpaid, which guest drank secretly, which child was frightened, which marriage had failed, and which fortune was shrinking. The official version of wealth was created upstairs. The accurate version often lived downstairs. Automobiles extended the estate beyond its gates. The 1950s produced some of the most dramatic American cars ever built. Long bodies, chrome, tail fins, powerful engines, broad seats, and colours inspired by aviation and consumer optimism. For the middle class, a new automobile represented freedom and achievement. For the rich, one car was rarely enough. A household garage might contain formal limousines, convertibles, station wagons, sports cars, utility vehicles, and older models kept for sentimental reasons. Cars were assigned functions. The chauffeur-driven Cadillac, or Lincoln, carried the family to city events. The European sports car offered private excitement. A station wagon transported children and luggage. A jeep or truck served the ranch or estate. The garage itself could employ mechanics and washers. Cars were cleaned, fueled, serviced, and positioned. A passenger entered without checking oil, tyre pressure, weather, or directions. The chauffeur understood routes, schedules, and discretion. He heard telephone conversations before mobile phones existed because passengers spoke freely from the back seat. He waited outside clubs, offices, restaurants, hospitals, theatres, and private apartments. Waiting was part of the job. The rich could remain inside because someone else remained with the car. A chauffeur's life was structured by another person's unpredictability. A dinner scheduled to end at 10 might continue until 2. A weekend trip could be announced with little warning. A mistress might require transportation. A child might need rescue from school. The employee's family adapted to the employer's freedom. The wealthy experienced spontaneity because workers absorbed the disruption. On the road, the contrast with ordinary America was visible through the windows. The limousine passed new suburbs filled with modest ranch houses, shopping centres, diners, gasoline stations and schools. It passed industrial districts where workers produced the goods displayed in wealthy homes. It passed black neighbourhoods isolated by redlining and restrictive housing practices. America appeared prosperous from the back seat, but prosperity changed by street. The construction of the interstate highway system, authorised in 1956, promised national mobility, defence readiness, and economic expansion. It also destroyed neighbourhoods, displaced residents, and reshaped cities. The rich often benefited first from mobility. Their land increased in value, their businesses gained access to markets, their suburban and country residences became easier to reach. Families displaced by highway construction experienced the same project as loss. The 1950s were built on these simultaneous realities. A television advertisement displayed a gleaming kitchen. A domestic worker cleaned such kitchens for wages that could not purchase the advertised home. A corporate executive praised free enterprise from a dining room staffed by people with little economic freedom. A charity gala raised money for poverty, while using flowers that cost more than a labourer earned in months. The contradiction did not make the generosity false, it made the society complicated. Politics entered the mansion through private dinners and telephone calls. Wealthy Americans supported candidates, hosted fundraisers, financed organisations, influenced newspapers, served in government, and advised officials. Business leaders argued that prosperity depended on low regulation and private initiative. Labour unions argued that prosperity had been created through worker power, wartime planning, and collective bargaining. The decade's apparent consensus concealed fierce struggles over taxes, wages, civil rights, communism, and the role of government. The Cold War intensified elite anxiety. The wealthy possessed more property to protect and more connections to strategic industries. Defense contractors expanded. Investors watched military spending. Families discussed Soviet power over dinner beneath paintings from old Europe. Some built private fallout shelters. A shelter could be hidden beneath a garden, basement, garage, or country property. It might contain canned food, water, bunks, radios, medical supplies, generators, ventilation systems, and weapons. The shelter transformed wealth into a survival calculation. Who would be allowed inside? Family, staff, guests, guards? What happened when employees arrived with their own children? How long could supplies last? Could a private refuge survive a public catastrophe? The mansion had always been designed to separate insiders from outsiders. Nuclear fear made the moral meaning of the gate impossible to ignore. Civil defense materials encouraged ordinary families to prepare, but preparedness required space and money. A suburban basement offered some protection. A crowded apartment or rented room offered less. Even at the end of the world, real estate mattered. The fear of communism affected social life in less physical ways. During the Red Scare, accusations could ruin careers. Hollywood figures faced blacklists. Government employees were investigated. Universities, unions, and cultural organizations came under suspicion. Wealth could provide legal defense and private support, but it could also attract political scrutiny. Some rich Americans funded anti-communist groups. Others defended civil liberties. Many remained cautious. A guest list could become political evidence. Inviting the wrong person, supporting the wrong organization, or signing the wrong petition might carry consequences. Society hostesses who once judged guests by family now also considered ideology. The drawing room became part of the Cold War battlefield. The richest media owners held especially significant power. Newspaper publishers, magazine proprietors, radio executives, and television leaders influenced what Americans saw and discussed. William S. Paley, head of CBS, stood at the center of a new communications empire. His wealth and marriage to the glamorous Barbara "Babe" Paley connected corporate media power with elite social life. Babe Paley became an icon of style. Photographs presented perfect clothing, posture, rooms, and composure. She represented the ideal of the society woman whose elegance appeared natural. Yet such perfection required relentless discipline. Fittings, grooming, diet, scheduling, social calculation, and emotional control. The image became a kind of labor. The public consumed photographs of effortless privilege without seeing the hours required to create them. Women like Babe Paley, CZ Guest, and other celebrated figures were not merely rich, they became templates for aspiration. Their clothes, houses, gardens, friendships, and vacations were studied. A woman in a middle-class home might copy a hairstyle or table setting from a magazine. The imitation was affordable. The system behind the original was not. The photograph showed a dress. It did not show inherited access, staff, fittings, travel, photographers, editors, and social networks. Luxury reproduced itself through images. Advertising borrowed the visual language of the rich and sold fragments of it to the middle class. A refrigerator promised modern elegance. A sedan promised executive status. A cigarette suggested country club confidence. A perfume suggested the mysterious evening life of society women. Consumers were invited to purchase symbols detached from the original fortune. This was one of the great achievements of the 1950s economy. Aristocratic desire became mass market demand. The middle class could not buy the estate, but it could buy the cocktail shaker. It could not employ a chauffeur, but it could own a car styled like a private aircraft. It could not maintain a ballroom, but it could purchase a television and watch one. The rich supplied the dream. Industry manufactured smaller versions. At home, technology entered elite life in unusual ways. Air conditioning transformed summer living. Before mechanical cooling, even large houses depended on shutters, fans, terraces, high ceilings, seasonal migration, and night air. By the 1950s, wealthy households could increasingly control temperature. A Palm Beach room could remain cold behind closed windows while heat pressed against the walls outside. Air conditioning changed clothing, schedules, architecture, and social geography. It allowed homes, offices, hotels, and theatres in hot regions to operate with new comfort. The rich experienced climate as something negotiable. Swimming pools became another symbol of controlled nature. A private pool required construction, filtration, heating in some climates, cleaning, chemicals, landscaping, furniture, towels, changing rooms, and supervision. It offered exercise, parties, romance, and display. In photographs, the pool appeared empty or populated by beautiful guests. Workers entered the frame only when something failed. The clean blue water concealed pumps, pipes, and labour. Pools also introduced danger. Children drowned. Guests drank too much. Diving accidents occurred. Wealth could create controlled environments, but not perfect control. Security responded to risk. Some estates employed guards or private detectives. Dogs patrolled grounds. Valuable art required alarms. Jewelry travelled under protection. Children of famous families could become targets for kidnapping. The 1932 Lindbergh kidnapping remained in national memory, and wealthy parents understood that publicity increased vulnerability. Nurseries were protected. Travel plans were concealed. Employees were screened. Newspapers sometimes cooperated with requests for privacy. A child could grow up behind walls without knowing whether the walls represented privilege or fear. Money attracted requests from every direction. Letters arrived asking for medical help, tuition, business investment, disaster relief, church support, political donations, and personal rescue. Some appeals were genuine, others were manipulative. Secretaries sorted them. The wealthy developed systems for saying no. Foundations required applications. Offices issued polite refusals. Personal requests were redirected. Friends and relatives were categorized according to urgency and danger. To possess a great fortune was to become a private institution, whether one wanted to or not. Relatives expected assistance. Employees asked for loans. Politicians sought contributions. Universities offered honors. Museums requested art. Communities wanted buildings. Strangers believed that one check could transform their lives. Often, they were correct. The burden lay in deciding who would receive it. Some wealthy Americans became serious philanthropists, spending years studying particular problems. Others treated giving as reputation management. Some gave impulsively. Some barely gave at all. Public generosity and private selfishness could inhabit the same person. A millionaire might fund a hospital and refuse to raise a maid's wages. He might support education while opposing integration. He might speak of family values while maintaining several households. He might praise hard work after inheriting the capital that made risk survivable. The richest Americans were not a single moral type. Wealth amplified difference. A generous person could become extraordinarily generous. A controlling person could control entire environments. A fearful person could build walls. A curious person could collect worlds. Art collecting offered one of the most visible expressions of personality. Some collectors pursued paintings, sculpture, furniture, rare books, porcelain, silver, textiles, or archaeological objects with genuine passion. They studied experts, travelled to dealers, competed at auctions, and developed relationships with museums. Others collected because important people were expected to own important things. Dealers understood vanity. They described provenance, rarity, and cultural significance. They arranged private viewings. They knew which collector wanted scholarship and which wanted triumph. A purchase could become social warfare. Acquiring a painting desired by a rival created pleasure beyond ownership. Lending it to an exhibition created prestige. Donating it to a museum created public memory. A name carved into stone could outlive the company that produced the fortune. Collectors also benefited from a global art market shaped by war. Europe emerged from the Second World War economically damaged. Families sold property and art. Dealers moved objects across borders. American money acquired pieces once held in aristocratic collections. The transfer of cultural wealth reflected the transfer of geopolitical power. Old Europe sold, New America bought. Inside an American mansion, a French chair, Italian painting, Russian icon, Chinese vase, and English silver service could gather beneath one roof. The room presented global history as private decoration. Guests admired civilization without discussing how it had been priced. European travel reinforced the new American confidence. Before the war, wealthy Americans often looked toward Europe for cultural legitimacy. After the war, they arrived with stronger currency and greater economic power. Hotels, shops, restaurants, designers, and galleries welcomed them. The American millionaire in Paris was no longer merely an outsider seeking approval. He was a customer capable of changing the season. Families crossed the Atlantic by luxury liner or aircraft. Ocean travel retained ceremony. Trunks, steamer chairs, formal dinners, orchestras, deck games, and days at sea. First-class passengers inhabited a moving social world. They recognized names from New York, Newport, Palm Beach, London, and Paris. Business and romance continued between ports. Servants travelled in separate accommodations. Dogs might receive special arrangements. The voyage itself became part of the social calendar. Air travel gradually reduced the Atlantic from days to hours. Wealthy passengers used premium service, private lounges, and flexible schedules. The jet age approached, promising even faster movement. The world was becoming smaller for people who could afford the ticket. At home, the rich preserved older rituals even as technology accelerated life. Letters were still written on engraved stationery. Invitations were delivered formally. Calling cards remained useful. Flowers carried messages. Black tie retained authority. The household might contain televisions, intercoms, modern refrigerators, and powerful automobiles, while dinners followed rules established generations earlier. The 1950s elite lived between centuries. They trusted new corporations, but loved old portraits. They flew in aircraft and slept in canopy beds. They discussed nuclear power beneath chandeliers designed for candles. Modernity entered through the service entrance and was dressed to resemble tradition. Nowhere was this more visible than in country houses renovated for contemporary comfort. Behind panelled walls, electricians installed wiring. Historic rooms gained air conditioning. Antique kitchens became service spaces, while new kitchens expanded behind them. Elevators connected floors. Telephones multiplied. The owner enjoyed old-world atmosphere without old-world inconvenience. A fire blazed in the library, while central heating warmed the rest of the house. A silver bell summoned a servant who received instructions through an intercom. The past became a luxury product updated by engineering. Fashion also joined old symbols with modern materials. Men wore conservative suits that signaled authority rather than novelty. Dark business clothing, white shirts, silk ties, polished shoes, and restrained accessories communicated seriousness. At country estates, tweed, riding clothes, hunting jackets, and casual knitwear softened the image. A wealthy man could appear modest while wearing garments made specifically for him. Fit revealed expense more reliably than decoration. Women's fashion changed through the decade, but the elite continued to rely on couture structure. Gowns shaped the body. Gloves completed public appearance. Hats signaled occasion. Fur suggested status, warmth, and tradition. A full-length mink coat contained the labour of trappers, processors, designers, fitters, salespeople, storage specialists, and cleaners. The wearer experienced a single, smooth surface. Luxury compressed hidden work into visible elegance. Beauty required similar infrastructure. Hairdressers came to the house or received clients privately. Manicurists, dressmakers, masseuses, and beauty specialists worked around social schedules. Cosmetic procedures existed but were discussed discreetly. A wealthy woman was expected to age without appearing to make an effort against age. Photographs were retouched, lighting was managed, unflattering images were discouraged. The face became part of the family brand. Men were not free from appearance, though the standard differed. A powerful man could age, gain weight, lose hair, and remain socially authoritative. His suit, office, automobile, and name carried the image. Masculine wealth was allowed to look comfortable. Feminine wealth had to remain beautiful. The difference shaped daily life. The body itself became a disciplined estate. Dieting, smoking, drinking, pills, exercise, riding, swimming, and beauty treatments were used to maintain the desired outline. Food surrounded the wealthy, yet elite women were expected not to appear hungry. At dinner, servants offered rich courses while guests performed restraint. To eat too eagerly suggested lack of control. Control was the hidden value beneath 1950s privilege. The perfect lawn demonstrated control over nature. The silent servant demonstrated control over labor. The formal dinner demonstrated control over appetite. The family portrait demonstrated control over conflict. The gate demonstrated control over access. But control constantly failed. Children rebelled, marriages ended, fortunes shrank, employees talked, newspapers investigated, bodies aged, companies lost markets, political movements entered the streets. The decade that appeared calm in photographs contained powerful social change. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education declared state laws establishing segregated public schools unconstitutional. In 1955, the murder of Emmett Till exposed racial terror to a wider national audience. That same year, the Montgomery bus boycott began after Rosa Parks refused to surrender her seat. The civil rights movement challenged the moral claims of prosperous America. Wealthy families responded differently. Some supported civil rights organizations and integration. Others defended segregation, openly or quietly. Businesses worried about reputation, labor, and political consequences. Northern society often congratulated itself while maintaining segregated housing, discriminatory clubs, and exclusionary schools. A hostess could condemn Southern violence while never inviting a black family to dinner. The movement forced private inequality into public conversation. Black entertainers exposed elite hypocrisy with particular clarity. They performed in hotels, clubs, casinos, and private parties, where they could not always stay, dine, or enter through the same doors as white guests. Their talent was welcomed, their equality was not. Wealthy audiences applauded music created by people excluded from their neighborhoods. The contradiction was audible in every note. Some entertainers used fame to challenge barriers. Others navigated the system carefully because careers depended on white-controlled venues, studios, networks, and distributors. A performer could be internationally famous and still be humiliated by a hotel clerk. Money did not erase race, nor did it erase religion or ancestry. Anti-Semitism remained present in clubs, schools, neighborhoods, and corporate culture. Jewish financiers, merchants, entertainers, and professionals achieved great wealth while encountering closed doors. In response, new institutions and social networks developed. Hotels, resorts, clubs, and philanthropic organizations created alternative centers of power. The excluded rich built their own rooms. Over time, those rooms could become more dynamic than the ones that rejected them. This pattern repeated across American history. Old elites defended boundaries. New groups accumulated wealth, created institutions, and altered the definition of status. The 1950s appeared stable because the battles often occurred behind invitations, membership votes, real estate agreements, and school admissions. A rejection letter could maintain a social wall without public protest. Jewish wealth was especially visible in entertainment, retail, real estate, and finance, but visibility did not guarantee acceptance. Families balanced assimilation with identity, philanthropy, and community responsibility. They understood that success could coexist with vulnerability. The memory of the Holocaust was immediate. European relatives had been killed or displaced. American prosperity existed beside knowledge of what supposedly civilized societies could do. For some families, luxury carried urgency. Build now, travel now, educate the children, support institutions, create security before history changes again. History had already changed once with terrifying speed. The Second World War remained present in every wealthy household. Some fortunes had grown through wartime production. Factories supplied uniforms, vehicles, chemicals, weapons, food, communications equipment, and aircraft. Corporate leaders emerged from the war with expanded facilities and government relationships. The military-industrial relationship deepened during the Korean War and Cold War. A defense contract could enrich shareholders while sending working-class sons into danger. At dinner, executives discussed production targets. On television, families watched battlefield reports. The distance between contract and casualty could be several rooms wide. Yet many wealthy families had also lost sons in war. Gold stars appeared in privileged homes. Grief did not respect income. The difference was not whether the rich suffered, it was how suffering was held. A family could retreat to a private property, establish a memorial, fund a building, or remove itself from public view. The name of the dead son might be attached to a library, hospital wing, scholarship, or chapel. Wealth transformed private grief into permanent architecture. Ordinary families preserved photographs. Rich families could reshape institutions. The post-war corporate executive became a new type of elite figure. He might not own the company outright. Instead, he controlled it through position, stock, board relationships, and managerial authority. His wealth came through salary, bonuses, options, investments, and benefits. The corporations supplied cars, clubs, travel, offices, and expense accounts. Personal luxury blended with business expense. A dinner at an exclusive restaurant might be entertainment, negotiation, and strategy. A company retreat could resemble a vacation. A corporate apartment could support private convenience. The boundary between earning money and enjoying it became intentionally vague. Executives often lived in affluent suburbs rather than hereditary estates. Their houses were large but more modern, their lifestyles connected to commuter trains, highways, and corporate campuses. They represented a new upper class based on organization rather than ancestry. Their children attended elite schools, their wives joined charity committees, their names entered club lists. Within a generation, new corporate wealth could learn the manners of old money. Capital changed clothing. The office itself expressed hierarchy. The chairman occupied a corner suite with windows, private washroom, conference room, bar, art, and secretarial support. Junior employees worked in open spaces or smaller offices. Elevators sometimes reinforced rank. The executive floor functioned like the upper level of a mansion. Access was controlled. Food arrived. Visitors waited. Information moved through assistants. The same architecture of service followed wealth from home to work. Secretaries were essential to elite power. They managed calendars, letters, calls, travel, gifts, reminders, and personal crises. A senior secretary might know more about an executive's life than his family did. Yet the role was gendered and unequal. Women performed complex administrative and emotional labor, while men received public authority. A secretary could shape decisions by controlling access, but remained described as support. She protected the executive from inconvenience and absorbed his anger. The polished male leader often stood on invisible female labor. Wives performed similar work without salaries. A corporate wife hosted colleagues, remembered names, maintained the home, participated in local organizations, and protected her husband's image. His advancement could depend partly on her social performance. She was expected to enjoy the privilege and ignore the dependence. Divorce could threaten not only marriage but career. Companies preferred stability. Boards valued discretion. A wife who drank publicly, spoke politically, or created scandal could become a business concern. The family was part of corporate presentation. This pressure produced immaculate photographs and private desperation. The 1950s prescription for anxiety often involved silence. Men worked, drank, or disappeared into clubs. Women received sedatives or advice to rest. Children were sent away to school. Servants managed the atmosphere. The house remained beautiful. A visitor might never know that no one inside was speaking honestly. Architecture allowed conflict to spread without collision. Husband and wife could occupy different wings. Children could eat separately. Guests filled rooms that family members avoided. The mansion protected people from one another. At night, the estate changed character. During parties, every window glowed. Automobiles lined the drive. Music reached the gardens. Servants crossed behind curtains carrying trays. Laughter rose above the pool. After the guests departed, darkness returned unevenly. The kitchen remained bright. Staff washed crystal, counted silver, removed cigarette ash, collected glasses, wrapped food, swept floors, and carried furniture back into position. Upstairs, the owners slept or argued. By dawn, the house had erased the evidence. Luxury was the art of resetting the scene. The next visitors encountered fresh flowers, clean carpets, and polished tables. The labour of the night disappeared. This erasure shaped historical memory. Photographs preserve the hostess, not the maid cleaning behind her. Magazines show the dining room before dinner, not the kitchen after midnight. Biographies follow the millionaire into the library, but rarely follow the cook to the bus stop. To understand how the rich really lived, the camera must remain after the party. It must watch a laundress lift wine-stained linen into hot water. It must follow a chauffeur driving home through empty streets. It must enter the small room where a maid removes her shoes after standing all day. It must count how many lives were organized around one family's comfort. The richest households were communities, but unequal ones. An estate might contain more employees than family members. Their wages circulated through nearby towns. Their children attended local schools. Their purchasing supported shops. The mansion was not isolated economically, even when it was isolated socially. When an estate closed, an entire network could lose income. The decline of domestic service therefore carried complicated consequences. Workers escaped restrictive employment, but communities lost stable positions. Women entered factories, offices, hospitals, schools, hotels, and retail jobs. New opportunities offered independence, though not always better pay. The great house struggled to replace them. Owners complained that servants no longer understood service. Workers understood that other jobs offered evenings, privacy, and dignity. The post-war labour market changed the meaning of obedience. Some families responded with technology. Kitchens became easier to operate. Houses were closed. Meals became less formal. Catering replaced permanent staff. Apartments replaced estates. The wealthy did not become poor. Their style became more efficient. A smaller staff could support a large life if appliances, automobiles, and outside services absorbed the work. The modern luxury economy began to replace household servants with companies. Laundry services, decorators, caterers, travel agents, security firms, maintenance contractors, and private clubs performed tasks once contained within the estate. Labour remained. It became less visible and more specialised. The richest Americans also purchased distance through second and third homes. A city apartment provided access to business and culture. A country house offered privacy. A beach house offered seasonal relaxation. A ranch offered land and masculinity. A European villa offered refinement. Each home expressed a different identity. In the city, the owner was powerful. In the country, traditional. At the beach, informal. At the ranch, rugged. In Europe, cultivated. Wealth allowed personality to become geographic. Rooms supported the performance. The city library contained serious books and dark wood. The beach house displayed pale fabrics and nautical objects. The ranch included leather, stone, trophies, and large fireplaces. The Palm Beach villa used tile, courtyards, fountains, and tropical colour. The owner moved between versions of self. Staff moved between workloads. Seasonal migration could be exhausting for employees. Packing a household required inventories, trunks, labels, shipping, insurance, and coordination. Clothing had to arrive ready. Pets required documents and care. Medicine, documents, valuables, and personal objects travelled separately. The family experienced departure as escape. The staff experienced it as logistics. Travel agents and private secretaries became essential. A complex European trip might involve ship cabins, aircraft seats, hotel suites, drivers, restaurant reservations, theatre tickets, visas, currency, guides, medical information, and introductions. The traveller arrived to discover that everything had already been decided. Spontaneity was carefully scheduled. In hotels, wealth created its own layer of reality. The richest guests occupied suites with sitting rooms, dining areas, multiple bedrooms, and private terraces. Managers greeted them personally. Flowers and preferred drinks waited. Clothing was unpacked. Messages were handled. A major hotel maintained files on important guests. Staff remembered food preferences, allergies, habits, names of companions, and demands. Information became hospitality. The guest interpreted recognition as affection. Luxury hotels allowed wealthy travelers to recreate the service of home without carrying an entire household. They were temporary estates operated by corporations. Conrad Hilton understood that modern wealth wanted consistent prestige across cities and countries. The hotel became a symbol of American expansion. A traveller could enter a familiar system in an unfamiliar place. The lobby represented public glamour. The suite restored private control. Las Vegas offered a more explosive version of this promise. During the 1950s, casinos and resorts turned desert into spectacle. Neon, entertainment, gambling, restaurants, pools, and celebrity appearances created a landscape where new money felt at home. Old society relied on inherited rules. Las Vegas offered immediate recognition to anyone who could spend. The high roller received rooms, meals, entertainment, and attention. Money moved visibly across tables. Risk became performance. For some wealthy Americans, gambling provided one of the few remaining experiences of financial danger. A person worth millions could lose thousands without threatening survival. The thrill came from pretending the number mattered. Casinos understood the psychology. They offered credit, privacy, gifts, and companionship. A guest could feel powerful while the house calculated probabilities. The wealthy believed they were buying excitement. The casino was buying information about them. Nightclubs performed a similar exchange. A good table signaled status. The owner or maitre d' greeted important guests. Champagne appeared. Performers acknowledged familiar faces. Photographers captured entrances and exits. The night became evidence of relevance. To be rich in private was not always enough. One had to be seen in the correct places by the correct people. Visibility confirmed membership. Yet excessive visibility remained dangerous for old families. The ideal was recognition without desperation. A person who called photographers appeared vulgar. A person whom photographers naturally followed appeared important. Publicity had to look accidental. Society columnists became gatekeepers of this illusion. They reported parties, engagements, divorces, travel, and fashion. Inclusion confirmed status. Omission could feel like disappearance. Hosts cultivated relationships with columnists while pretending indifference. A few lines in print could repair or damage social standing. The newspapers turned private hierarchy into public entertainment. Millions read about people they would never meet. The details seemed glamorous. Who wore what? Who arrived with whom? Who danced until dawn? Missing from the column were wages, contracts, discrimination, loneliness, and the next morning's clean-up. The reader received the dream in concentrated form. For the rich themselves, publicity could distort behavior. Parties became larger because they would be covered. Jewelry became more visible. Guest lists became strategic. The private home became a media set. This process accelerated with celebrity weddings. The marriage of a film star, hotel heiress, industrial heir, or society beauty could dominate newspapers. Photographers waited outside churches and estates. Designers gained publicity. Hotels and jewelers benefited. Love became content. The couple's private future began beneath public expectation. When the marriage failed, the same audience consumed the collapse. Wealthy divorce exposed financial structures usually hidden from view. Newspapers reported settlements, properties, jewelry, custody, and accusations. The public discovered that the perfect house had contained separate lives. Scandal satisfied a democratic appetite. Americans might admire wealth, but they also enjoyed proof that wealth did not prevent misery. The ruined marriage, addicted heir, family lawsuit, or lonely billionaire restored moral balance. Money could buy everything except happiness, the newspapers suggested. The phrase comforted people without money and frightened people who had it. In reality, money purchased many conditions associated with well-being: safety, space, treatment, time, education, travel, and relief from daily stress. But it could not manufacture trust, purpose, or affection. The richest Americans lived with both truths. They possessed extraordinary freedom and extraordinary suspicion. Every invitation raised questions. Every romance attracted motive. Every advisor might be loyal or predatory. Every child might be loved or spoiled. Every public gift might be praised or attacked. The fortune protected the family while making it a target. Kidnapping, extortion, theft, fraud, and blackmail were real concerns. Employees underwent scrutiny. Safes were hidden. Jewelry was inventoried. Sensitive letters were destroyed or locked away. Telephone calls could be recorded or monitored. Security created its own vulnerability because guards and staff learned the system. The inner circle had to be trusted, but access made betrayal profitable. Some wealthy people tested loyalty through small humiliations. They delayed payment, watched expenses, planted information, or demanded constant availability. Power damaged relationships by making equality difficult. A billionaire could dismiss an employee, reward a friend, fund a relative, or destroy a partnership. Even casual anger carried economic force. People learned to laugh at jokes, tolerate moods, and agree. The rich person could lose contact with honest reaction. A room full of agreement became another luxury and another danger. This problem followed political donors and corporate leaders. Advisors delivered information carefully. Bad news was softened. Personal habits became policy because no one wished to object. The higher the fortune rose, the fewer people could speak without fear. Isolation was not always chosen. It was produced by hierarchy. The great estate symbolized the condition perfectly. The gate excluded threats, but it also excluded ordinary correction. Inside, preferences became reality. The grass was cut to the preferred height. Meals arrived at the preferred hour. Guests were selected. Newspapers were placed at the preferred angle. The owner could begin to mistake obedience for natural order. This had political consequences. Many wealthy Americans believed their success proved judgment and character. Some had indeed built companies through intelligence, courage, and relentless work. But fortune also depended on inheritance, timing, public infrastructure, labor, law, war, resources, and luck. The mansion edited those contributions out of the story. From the terrace, wealth looked self-created. The factory was far away. The mine was farther. The labor camp, railroad yard, oil field, and company town disappeared behind distance. Dividends arrived without dust. A shareholder could benefit from industries never personally visited. The 1950s corporate economy separated ownership from physical production. Wealth became numbers on statements, meetings in offices, and instructions transmitted through layers of management. The consequences remained physical for workers. Steel workers faced furnaces. Miners entered the earth. Chemical workers inhaled danger. Farm laborers bent beneath sun. Truck drivers crossed long distances. Secretaries typed until their hands hurt. The owner received abstraction. The worker received impact. This does not mean every wealthy owner ignored labor. Some toured plants, negotiated with unions, funded safety improvements, and developed genuine relationships with employees. Others saw workers mainly as costs. The decade's labor peace was never complete. Strikes, negotiations, and union power shaped corporate decisions. Executives understood that workers possessed collective strength. The mansion's comfort partly reflected bargaining conducted at factory gates. Higher wages expanded the middle class, which purchased the products that produced corporate profits. Prosperity circulated, though not equally. The wealthy often described themselves as guardians of growth. They invested capital, funded expansion, created companies, and supported innovation. Their critics saw concentrated power, inherited privilege, and political influence. Both views contained truth. Great fortunes could build industries and distort democracy at the same time. The same family might create thousands of jobs, suppress unions, fund a university, influence legislation, collect art, and underpay domestic staff. History resists clean verdicts. The mansion was beautiful. The system beneath it could be cruel. The owner could be charming. The fortune could have violent origins. The worker could resent the family and depend on the estate. The philanthropist could relieve suffering created by the economic order that enriched him. Contradiction was not a flaw in the picture. It was the picture. Religion helped some wealthy families interpret responsibility. They attended prominent churches, funded buildings, supported missions, and served on boards. Ministers preached stewardship, wealth as a trust rather than possession. For sincere believers, giving became moral obligation. For others, religious membership reinforced social position. The church pew mapped hierarchy almost as clearly as the dining table. Families donated windows, organs, chapels, and endowments. Their names entered sacred space. The poor prayed beneath memorials to the rich. Faith could challenge privilege, but institutions often depended on wealthy donors. A clergyman who criticized inequality risked offending the people who financed the roof. The relationship required negotiation. Universities faced similar dependence. Elite families donated libraries, laboratories, scholarships, professorships, dormitories, and entire schools. Their children received education within institutions shaped by previous family gifts. Admission was never simply academic. Legacy, social background, geography, school connections, and donor relationships mattered. A rich child's application arrived with history attached. Universities defended merit while preserving networks. The education itself could be excellent. The opportunity was not equal. Graduates entered banks, law firms, diplomatic service, corporations, media, medicine, and politics. The classroom reproduced the ruling network. Connections made during adolescence shaped decisions decades later. A casual friendship at boarding school could become access to a senator, banker, newspaper executive, or foundation trustee. The wealthy inherited relationships as well as assets. This social capital was harder to see than a mansion, and often more powerful. A family could lose money and remain influential through name and network. Another could gain money and remain excluded. True elite status combined fortune with recognition. The 1950s were a period when these categories began shifting faster. Entertainment wealth, oil wealth, corporate wealth, and real estate wealth challenged older hierarchies. The West Coast gained cultural power. Texas gained economic power. Washington gained federal power. New York remained financial and social center, but no longer stood alone. The map of American privilege expanded. Palm Beach became a meeting point where old and new money negotiated status beneath tropical sun. The social season involved private clubs, charity events, dinners, golf, shopping, and visits between estates. White clothing, convertibles, bright architecture, and ocean air created an appearance of ease. But Palm Beach society retained boundaries. Membership decisions could reflect religion, ancestry, and family. New arrivals sought acceptance. Old residents defended tradition. A town built for escape became a laboratory of exclusion. Behind the hedges, staff maintained gardens in intense heat. Service workers travelled from less wealthy communities. Racial segregation shaped housing and employment. The tropical paradise depended on invisible geography. Mar-a-Lago, completed before the 1950s but still a symbol of immense wealth during the era, represented the dream of a private American palace. Its scale, ornament, and location communicated permanence. Yet even palaces depended on changing economies. Maintaining them required constant money. Their future depended on heirs, taxes, institutional use, sale, or reinvention. Many great houses survived only by becoming something other than private homes. Museums, schools, hotels, clubs, and event venues preserved architecture that family fortunes could no longer support. Public admission replaced private invitation. Visitors now walk through rooms once accessible only to guests and servants. Ropes protect furniture. Guides explain the owners. Gift shops occupy former service spaces. The mansion becomes history when the family can no longer keep it secret. In the 1950s, that transformation had already begun. Some owners opened gardens for charity events, others donated collections. Estate sales exposed household objects to public purchase. At auction, the intimate objects of wealth lost their context. A silver frame, dressing table, riding crop, dinner service, or library chair passed into another home. The family legend fragmented into lots. Dealers and collectors understood that provenance added value. An ordinary object became important because a famous person had touched it. The rich continued producing wealth after death through association. Funerals displayed the final hierarchy. A prominent death brought family, employees, business leaders, politicians, clergy, and reporters together. Flags lowered, offices closed. Statements praised leadership and generosity. The coffin travelled through spaces built by the fortune. Private grief merged with public legacy. Wills then revealed hidden structures. Children discovered trusts, conditions, unequal distributions, charitable gifts, debts, and control extending beyond the grave. A patriarch could direct family behaviour through money long after death. Inheritance became obedience written into law. Some wills required heirs to reach certain ages, avoid unsuitable marriages, remain involved in business, or receive only income rather than principal. Trustees enforced the dead person's caution. The fortune survived by limiting the living. Estate taxes encouraged planning and philanthropy, but also forced sales. Land was divided. Art entered museums or auctions. Companies changed ownership. The death of one person could alter landscapes. A gate opened because an heir could not pay the cost of keeping it closed. New subdivisions appeared. The public drove through former privacy. The post-war housing boom accelerated this process. Developers recognized that estate land near growing cities could produce enormous returns. A family might resist for years, then accept. Bulldozers entered gardens designed for permanence. Trees planted to shade generations were removed in days. Stone walls survived beside new roads as fragments of vanished boundaries. The middle-class houses that replaced estates represented aspiration, security, and progress for thousands of families. The destruction was also democratization. One family's private view became hundreds of backyards. Yet access remained unequal because discriminatory lending and housing practices excluded many black families from the suburban wealth boom. The land changed owners, but not everyone could buy. Government-backed mortgages helped white families build equity. Black families were often confined to neighborhoods denied investment. Decades later, the effects remained visible in household wealth. The 1950s mansion, therefore, cannot be understood apart from the 1950s suburb. They were different scales of the same national system. Both depended on land, credit, infrastructure, domestic ideals, and exclusion. One represented concentrated privilege, the other represented mass prosperity distributed unevenly. The family at the top looked down from a terrace. Millions looked upward through advertisements. Popular culture taught them what to desire. Magazines photographed living rooms, kitchens, pools, gardens, clothing, and vacations. Television dramas softened class conflict. Comedies presented servants as loyal characters rather than workers. The rich appeared eccentric, glamorous, or benevolent. Their economic power became personal style. A billionaire's control over industry was less visible than his yacht. This helped transform inequality into entertainment. The public debated whether a famous heiress would marry, or paying less attention to the workers producing her dividends. A scandalous party generated more interest than a tax law. Narrative protected structure. The rich became characters rather than institutions. Some understood this and cultivated personality. They posed with dogs, horses, paintings, aircraft, or children. They gave interviews in libraries. They appeared relaxed. The setting did most of the speaking. A portrait in front of a fireplace communicated tradition. A photograph beside a jet communicated modern power. A picture on a yacht communicated freedom. The image removed the staff moments before the shutter opened. Public relations professionals shaped language. A giant house became a family home. A business empire became an enterprise. Inherited wealth became responsibility. Political access became public service. Words softened scale. The richest Americans rarely called themselves rich. They described themselves as fortunate, busy, independent, or involved. Open acknowledgement risked public resentment. Modesty became a protective performance. This performance could be convincing because daily life normalized privilege. A child raised with several homes did not experience them as extraordinary. A private dining room at a club felt ordinary. A chauffeur seemed part of transportation. A trust seemed part of adulthood. Privilege was most powerful when experienced as normal. The rich compared themselves with richer people. A family with $5 million looked toward one with $50 million. The owner of a large house envied the owner of a larger estate. The person with a chartered aircraft envied the person who owned one. Comparison prevented satisfaction. From outside, all lived in abundance. Inside, distinctions mattered intensely. Was the fortune liquid or tied to property? Was the house inherited or newly purchased? Did the family own the land around it? Did the art have museum quality? Was the yacht large enough to cross the Atlantic? Did the club membership carry real status? The elite measured rank through details invisible to most Americans. Money did not end competition. It moved competition into finer categories. This could produce astonishing waste. A room might be redecorated because another hostess used a similar fabric. A yacht could be replaced because a rival owned a larger one. Jewelry might be reset to appear less old-fashioned. But competition could also fund beauty, research, architecture, and public institutions. A collector's desire to surpass a rival might place masterpieces in a museum. Motives and outcomes rarely aligned neatly. The same impulse could produce vanity and cultural preservation. Gardens offered another example. Wealthy owners hired landscape architects to create formal terraces, rose gardens, alleys, fountains, conservatories, woodlands, and views. Mature trees were moved, soil was replaced, plants arrived from distant climates. The garden appeared natural because immense effort concealed itself. Gardeners worked through heat, cold, rain, insects, and chemical exposure. They pruned, watered, fertilized, swept, repaired, and replanted. The owner walked outside and found spring arranged. Flowers could be forced in greenhouses for winter dinners. Orchids appeared in northern rooms while snow covered the grounds. Seasons became negotiable. Greenhouses also supplied fruit, herbs, and decorative plants. A wealthy table could display freshness unavailable to most families before modern distribution. Food traveled with money. Private farms, dairies, and orchards sometimes served estates. Owners valued purity, quality, and control. Milk came from known cows. Eggs came from private hens. Vegetables came from walled gardens. This rustic image depended on agricultural workers. The estate combined aristocratic tradition with modern consumption. Horses remained central to many elite lives. Riding offered sport, social connection, and inherited symbolism. Stables housed hunters, polo ponies, show horses, and children's mounts. Grooms maintained animals and equipment. Horse shows brought wealthy families together. Clothing, breeding, training, and performance all communicated status. The animal was both loved and instrumentalized. A horse could receive better medical care and housing than many human workers nearby. No one at the show discussed that comparison. Polo displayed privilege with particular clarity. It required horses, land, trainers, transport, equipment, and time. Players moved at speed across private fields, while spectators drank beneath tents. The sport connected American wealth to British and international elites. A good polo match was athletic competition and social gathering. Business relationships formed at the edge of the field. Golf performed a similar function with broader reach. Country clubs combined sport, dining, business, and family life. Membership provided access to people as much as courses. Deals began on fairways because conversation could unfold without formal records. The pace of golf suited influence. 4 hours allowed trust, pressure, observation, and negotiation. A person's behavior during a game revealed temperament, honesty, patience, vanity, control. Executives studied one another while appearing to relax. The club excluded those who might interrupt the social uniformity. Race, religion, gender, and class shaped entry. The manicured course represented controlled nature and controlled society. Outside the boundary, caddies and groundskeepers performed labor. Inside, members spoke of freedom. The rich were surrounded by service, but often described themselves as self-reliant. This contradiction appeared in masculine culture. A wealthy man might pride himself on hunting, sailing, ranching, or mechanical knowledge, while staff prepared equipment and resolved failures. His independence was supported. The photograph showed him alone with the landscape. The guide stood outside the frame. Still, competence could be real. Some industrialists understood machines deeply. Some ranch owners knew animals and land. Some sailors navigated difficult waters. Privilege does not erase skill. It changes the consequences of error. A rich amateur could survive failure financially. A professional depended on success. This freedom encouraged experimentation. Wealthy patrons supported aviation, exploration, science, architecture, and art, because they could risk money where institutions hesitated. Private capital funded innovation. It also funded vanity projects. The line between vision and obsession became clear only afterward. The 1950s admired technological optimism. Nuclear energy, rockets, electronics, plastics, highways, and aircraft promised transformation. The rich purchased early versions of the future. They installed advanced communication systems, modern kitchens, private screening rooms, hi-fi equipment, and experimental designs. A home stereo could turn a living room into a concert hall. Reel-to-reel recordings preserved performances. Projection rooms allowed films to be watched without entering a theatre. Entertainment came to the estate. Musicians and performers could also be brought in person. Private parties hired orchestras, jazz groups, singers, comedians, and dance bands. A celebrity might perform for a room smaller than the audience at a public venue. The wealthy purchased proximity. After the performance, the artist might join the guests or be paid and directed through the service exit. Status determined whether talent became membership. Some performers crossed the boundary through fame, charm, marriage, or business success. Hollywood accelerated this movement. An actor could arrive as entertainment and return as a guest. Old families worried that society was becoming theatrical. They were correct. The distinction between social rank and public recognition weakened. A person known to millions could not easily be ignored by a club known to hundreds. Celebrity created a rival aristocracy. Its titles came from box office receipts, record sales, television ratings, and magazine covers. The public voted with attention. This new aristocracy lived faster. Careers rose and fell within years rather than generations. Homes were bought and sold. Marriages changed. styles shifted. Old money prized continuity, celebrity wealth prized momentum. The two cultures met at parties, resorts, and marriages. An heir married an actress, a producer joined a country club, a society woman appeared in fashion magazines, a hotel magnate entered political circles. America's elite became more mixed and more visible, but not more equal. At the base of the system, millions remained poor. Rural families lived without plumbing or reliable electricity. Urban residents crowded into deteriorating housing. Migrant labourers followed crops. Black communities faced segregation and violence. Native communities endured poverty and federal policies designed to reshape land and identity. The wealthiest homes contained several bathrooms for a handful of people, while other households lacked one. The contrast was not hidden geographically. It could exist within miles. A maid crossed it twice a day. Morning carried her toward polished rooms. Night carried her back toward unpaid bills. The wealthy often understood poverty through charity rather than structure. They visited hospitals, funded settlement houses, donated clothes, and supported churches. These acts mattered. But charity preserved the giver's control. Workers and civil rights activists demanded rights, wages, housing, education, and political power rather than gratitude. That demand threatened the emotional order of philanthropy. The poor were expected to be deserving, thankful, and orderly. Protest appeared ungrateful. The civil rights movement refused the role. So did organised labour. The 1950s elite admired stability because stability protected assets. Strikes, protests, integration battles, and political movements disrupted the image of national harmony. Television carried disruption into private rooms. A family could watch demonstrations from a sofa while a servant cleared glasses behind them. History arrived as a broadcast before arriving at the gate. For some, it inspired action. For others, fear. Wealthy conservatives funded organisations defending limited government, anti-communism, private property, and traditional social order. Wealthy liberals funded civil rights, education, internationalism, and cultural institutions. Elite conflict shaped public debate. Money supported both resistance and reform. The richest Americans did not stand outside politics, they built much of its infrastructure. Campaigns required contributions. Candidates needed hosts. Parties needed meeting places. Newspapers needed owners. Think tanks and advocacy groups needed funding. A private dinner could produce public policy. The guest list might include a senator, corporate executive, attorney, publisher, and foundation president. By dessert, an idea had gained a network. Ordinary citizens would hear about it later. This access did not guarantee agreement or success, but it shortened distance to power. The poor wrote letters. The rich made calls. The telephone on the bedside table connected directly to offices that most people entered only through formal channels. Access was the quietest luxury. It could resolve legal trouble, secure appointments, influence admissions, obtain rare tickets, arrange medical consultations, or open foreign doors. A name spoken by the right person changed the response. No mansion displayed this resource, yet it was among the most valuable possessions inside. Connections could even change time. Waiting, one of life's great equalizers, became optional. Appointments moved, restaurants found tables, shops opened privately, doctors arrived, officials returned calls. The wealthy experienced a world that answered faster. This altered expectations. Delay felt like insult because speed had become normal. Employees learned to treat urgency as constant. A forgotten scarf could require a driver. A preferred food could be flown in. A guest's inconvenience became a household emergency. The resources spent solving small problems revealed the scale of command. Yet many wealthy people cultivated simplicity in private. They wore old clothes at country houses, ate leftovers, repaired objects, and kept childhood possessions. These habits could reflect genuine modesty or nostalgia. A billionaire's worn sweater fascinated observers because it seemed to prove ordinary humanity. But simplicity chosen within abundance differs from simplicity imposed by necessity. The owner could replace the sweater at any time. Choice transformed deprivation into style. The same applied to rustic houses, camps, and cabins. A family might escape to a supposedly simple lodge with stone fireplaces, rough wood, and limited electricity. Servants, supplies, boats, land, and privacy remained available. The experience offered release from formal luxury without surrendering security. The rich could visit simplicity and leave. This temporary closeness to ordinary life reinforced the idea that they understood it. They cooked one meal over a fire and praised self-sufficiency. The staff prepared the next morning. Children sometimes remembered these retreats as the happiest parts of privileged childhood. Away from formal houses, parents relaxed. Rules softened. Clothing became practical. Adults and children spent time together. Wealth could create genuine family intimacy when it purchased time and distance. It could also create separation when each family member escaped to a different place. The father travelled for business. The mother remained in society. Children attended boarding school. Servants maintained the home. The family owned several houses and rarely occupied one together. Photographs reunited them. Christmas was one of the moments when the full machinery became visible. Trees arrived, sometimes several for different rooms. Garlands covered staircases. Flowers, candles, gifts, food, cards, and guest lists multiplied. Servants wrapped presents for people who might not remember purchasing them. Secretaries maintained lists. Drivers delivered gifts. Cooks prepared days of meals. The family descended into a completed holiday. Children received toys, ponies, jewellery, travel, or trusts. Employees received bonuses of varying generosity. The emotional performance of Christmas depended on labour intensified by the season. After midnight, someone still washed the glasses. Summer demanded another transformation. Furniture covers disappeared, pools opened, boats launched, wardrobes changed, guest rooms filled. Teenagers arrived with friends. Adults hosted long weekends. Alcohol consumption increased. Romance moved through beaches, boats, and moonlit terraces. The estate became less formal and more dangerous. Cars moved fast on country roads. Boats carried inexperienced passengers. Young people with money tested limits. Local police knew the family names. Consequences could be negotiated. A crash might be described quietly. A scandal might be sent away to school or Europe. A pregnancy could disappear into private medical arrangements and family pressure. Respectability had a repair department. Ordinary families also concealed scandal, but wealth expanded the available solutions. Distance, lawyers, doctors, and money could rewrite events. The emotional cost remained. A young woman sent away understood that family reputation mattered more than her voice. A son protected from consequences learned that rules were flexible. The mansion preserved the name and sometimes damaged the people carrying it. Violence could also hide behind walls. Domestic abuse, sexual exploitation, and cruelty existed in rich households as elsewhere. Staff might witness signs but fear dismissal. Families used influence to suppress exposure. A respectable exterior discouraged belief. The victim possessed comfort, but not necessarily power. Money complicated escape. Leaving could mean losing children, inheritance, status, or social identity. The public imagined that a rich woman could simply go anywhere. The legal and emotional reality could be far narrower. The era's gender rules protected male authority. A husband controlled financial information. Lawyers often served the family rather than the wife. Doctors interpreted distress through cultural assumptions. A woman's protest could be labelled instability. Sedation restored silence. The same society that celebrated female glamour limited female agency. Some women used philanthropy and culture to build independent power. Museum boards, foundations, historical preservation, hospitals, and political committees offered influence that society considered acceptable. From these spaces, women shaped cities and institutions. The work was often dismissed as social activity because it occurred through luncheons, correspondence, and committees. In reality, decisions about millions of dollars could emerge from these networks. Soft power moved through drawing rooms. A skilled hostess understood that the room itself was an instrument. Lighting encouraged intimacy. Seating created encounters. Alcohol lowered caution. Privacy permitted honesty. The best parties felt spontaneous because planning had removed friction. Guests remained longer when they felt the evening belonged to them. The hostess guided without appearing to guide. This was political talent expressed through domestic form. Men often received credit for relationships cultivated by women. A business alliance began because wives maintained contact. A candidate met donors through a charity committee. A museum secured a collection through friendship. The invisible network held the visible one together. Servants supported both. The butler knew which guest should receive a stronger drink. The cook understood timing. The chauffeur delivered a politician privately. The maid removed evidence of an argument. The household became an intelligence system. Information moved upwards selectively. A good servant protected the family from embarrassment. A good hostess protected guests from discomfort. A good advisor protected the fortune from risk. Protection defined elite competence, but constant protection prevented adaptation. A child never allowed to fail became an adult unable to recover. An executive never contradicted made larger mistakes. A house never open to change became a museum before anyone noticed. The 1950s were the last full decade in which many old forms of American wealth still appeared secure. The cultural revolutions of the 1960s would challenge authority, race relations, gender roles, fashion, sexuality, universities, and trust in institutions. Taxes, inflation, global competition, and changing urban economies would alter fortunes. Domestic service would continue declining in its traditional form. Formal dress would loosen. Clubs would face pressure. Media scrutiny would intensify. The gates would remain, but the world outside would become louder. Even during the 1950s, younger heirs sensed change. Some rejected formal society. They pursued modern art, jazz, civil rights, psychology, Eastern religion, or unconventional relationships. Others embraced tradition more fiercely. The generation gap began before it received a name. A father saw duty to the family. A son saw imprisonment. A mother saw a proper marriage. A daughter saw surrender. The fortune offered options but demanded loyalty. Many heirs discovered that the only rebellion powerful enough to frighten the family was refusal of the money. Few refused completely. They might reject the business while accepting the trust. They might criticize wealth from a house purchased by it. They might support radical causes through inherited income. Contradiction followed them. Activism, funded by privilege, could still produce change. Some wealthy Americans supported civil rights organizations, legal defense, education, and reform. Their money helped movements survive. But donors could also attempt control, preferring moderate strategies and respectable leaders. Movements needed resources without becoming possessions. The relationship between wealth and reform remained uneasy. The same was true in the arts. Patrons funded experimental music, painting, theatre, architecture, and dance that commercial markets ignored. Artists gained time and space, but patronage created dependence. A collector's taste influenced careers. A board could define acceptable controversy. A museum donor expected access. Art challenged society from buildings named after society's richest families. This tension produced some of the century's most important institutions. The wealthy purchased beauty for themselves and sometimes left it to everyone. Whether this redeemed the fortune was a moral question, not an accounting one. Architecture became legacy because stone lasted longer than motive. A visitor today can walk through former estates and admire craftsmanship without knowing the labor disputes, family conflicts, racial exclusions, or financial strategies connected to the house. The building survives as aesthetic evidence. History must restore the missing people, the gardener on the terrace, The cook beneath the dining room, the secretary behind the executive, the nurse beside the heir, the factory worker beneath the dividend. Without them, the mansion appears to have built itself. The great houses of 1950s America were machines for converting labour into atmosphere. Heat became comfort, food became elegance, distance became privacy, money became tradition. Every smooth surface represented organised effort. The richest residents rarely experienced the full mechanism because invisibility was part of the design. A button was pressed, a door opened, a request was spoken, a car appeared, a party ended. By morning, the room was clean. This rhythm could make privilege feel natural, almost magical. But magic is often labour, viewed from the correct side of the curtain. The curtain itself was guarded by etiquette. Guests were not expected to enter service corridors. Children were taught not to interfere with staff. Employees were trained not to become visible. The house divided knowledge. Owners knew preference. Workers knew process. Owners remembered the dinner. Workers remembered the cleanup. Owners described a peaceful summer. Workers remembered the hours. Both stories were true, but only one usually entered the family archive. Private archives preserved invitations, portraits, business letters, and photographs. Servants' memories were less likely to be stored. When staff members died, entire histories disappeared. A housekeeper might have served 3 generations and left no official record beyond payroll. Yet she had watched the family become itself. She knew which traditions were ancient and which had been invented last year. Elite tradition often depended on repetition performed by employees. The same flowers appeared because a gardener remembered. The same holiday meal returned because a cook preserved the recipe. The same rooms were arranged because a housekeeper maintained continuity. Servants carried family culture without inheriting family wealth. Their labour created the feeling of permanence. When they left, the house changed more than owners expected. A new employee could learn duties but not memory. This is why long-time servants sometimes received unusual trust, gifts, or pensions. They were living archives. But gratitude remained at the owner's discretion. There was rarely collective power inside the private household. Domestic workers were isolated from one another and difficult to organise. Employment could depend on references controlled by former employers. A complaint risked future work. Silence became economic survival. The wealthy valued discretion because discretion protected reputation. References praised loyalty, neatness, punctuality, and calm. A servant who spoke publicly was considered dangerous, even when speaking truth. The household contract extended beyond wages into secrecy. This secrecy contributed to the mystery surrounding how the rich really lived. Public photographs showed luxury, rumours supplied scandal, reality moved between them. Many days were less dramatic than imagined. The owner read correspondence, attended meetings, visited a doctor, walked through gardens, argued about repairs, and ate a quiet dinner. Immense wealth did not make every hour exciting. It removed necessity, leaving time to be filled. Some filled it with work, others with collecting, travel, gossip, sport, affairs, drinking, charity, and worry. Boredom became an elite problem. Without economic pressure, purpose had to be invented. A self-made industrialist often retained purpose through business. His children inherited results without the struggle that had organised his life. He feared they would become soft. They resented being treated as unworthy of the fortune they had been raised to receive. Family conflict followed. The founder admired discipline and distrusted pleasure. The heir saw no reason to live like a clerk. Trustees mediated. Money became the language through which love and control were expressed. An increased allowance signalled approval. A restricted trust signalled judgment. A property transfer signalled trust. Disinheritance threatened exile. Families that avoided emotional conversation spoke fluently through assets. This could make affection impossible to measure. Did the father build the trust to protect the child or control him? Did the mother give jewelry as love or obligation? Did the heir visit because of family loyalty or fear of losing income? Every gesture carried financial shadow. Ordinary families also mixed love and money, but the scale magnified ambiguity. A disagreement could involve companies, estates, employees, and institutions. Family lawsuits exposed private conflict to public courts. The names engraved on hospitals appeared in accusations. The public watched with fascination. Again, scandal made wealth democratic by inviting judgment from everyone. Readers chose sides, newspapers simplified personalities. The mansion became a stage. Yet after the headlines faded, the system continued. Bankers managed assets, staff maintained houses, trustees issued checks. Great wealth possessed inertia. One generation could behave irresponsibly without destroying structures built by previous generations. This was one of inheritance's greatest powers. A poor family's mistake could cause immediate crisis. A rich family's mistake became a meeting. Losses were distributed across portfolios. A failed business could be offset by property. A costly divorce could be absorbed. A reckless child could be supported. The fortune turned catastrophe into inconvenience. Until it did not. Some fortunes collapsed through debt, taxes, litigation, addiction, mismanagement, or changing markets. A mansion was sold, staff dismissed, auctions announced. The fall of a rich family attracted the same fascination as its rise. People entered the estate sale and opened drawers once touched only by servants. They bought curtains, chairs, books, kitchen tools, and monogrammed linens. The private world dissolved into household objects. For employees, collapse meant lost work and sometimes lost housing. The family became a story. The staff needed another job. This difference reveals the structure beneath nostalgia. When people remember 1950s luxury, they often remember architecture, automobiles, fashion, and parties. The workers appear as atmosphere. But atmosphere does not receive severance pay. The decade's elegance rested on economic relationships that were changing. Unionized industrial workers gained stronger wages and benefits. Office work expanded. Women entered employment in large numbers despite cultural pressure to remain domestic. Immigration patterns changed. Black Americans continued the Great Migration into northern and western cities. Domestic service could no longer assume an unlimited supply of compliant workers. The private mansion competed with the modern economy. Many lost. Families closed wings, reduced formal dinners, and accepted more casual routines. The disappearance of servants did not end inequality. It changed its form. Later generations would rely on cleaners, nannies, assistants, chefs, drivers, landscapers, security contractors, and service companies. The work became fragmented across employers. The rich remained supported by labour, but fewer workers lived permanently behind the kitchen. The 1950s stand at the threshold between aristocratic household and modern luxury service economy. The old bell system and the new intercom occupied the same wall. The chauffeur waited beside a car designed like a rocket. The butler served cocktails while television broadcast the future. Now imagine one final evening at a great estate near the end of the decade. The sun lowers behind trees planted before the First World War. Sprinklers turn across a lawn divided from the road by stone walls. A gardener gathers tools before guests arrive. Inside, a maid draws curtains in the bedrooms. The housekeeper checks flowers. The cook tastes a sauce. A footman aligns glasses. The butler studies the seating chart. Upstairs, the hostess sits before a mirror while a hairdresser adjusts the final shape. Diamonds wait in an open case. Her husband speaks by telephone with a senator from the library. Their teenage daughter returns from riding and complains that the house feels old. Their son has written from boarding school asking for a new car. At the service entrance, crates of champagne arrive. Cars begin moving through the gates. A publisher steps from a limousine. An oilman arrives in a bright convertible. A European diplomat appears with his wife. A movie actress brings a wave of attention. An industrial heir enters late and slightly drunk. The hostess greets each person as though no other guest matters more. Cocktails move through the drawing room. Smoke rises. Laughter gathers beneath paintings purchased before some of the guests were born. Outside, the pool reflects the windows. Beyond the property, a worker drives home from the factory that produced part of the host's fortune. A black veteran searches for a house in a neighborhood where banks will approve his mortgage. A young woman types letters in a corporate office and wonders whether marriage will end her career. On television, the country speaks of freedom, prosperity, communism, integration, and the future. Inside the mansion, dinner is announced. Guests enter beneath a chandelier. Place cards guide them toward power. Servants pull back chairs. The conversation begins with Europe, moves to politics, touches business, avoids race, and ends in gossip. The rich appear secure, but outside the windows, the decade is already changing. Highways cut through cities, suburbs spread across former estates. Television makes privacy fragile. Civil rights activists challenge old boundaries. Women question prescribed lives. Young people distrust inherited authority. Taxes, maintenance, and divided fortunes weaken grand houses. The party is not ending tonight, but the world that made it possible is beginning to loosen. After midnight, the final guest leaves. The hostess removes her jewelry. The industrialist returns a call. The actress disappears into a waiting car. The servants begin cleaning. One by one, the lights go dark. The ballroom disappears first, then the library, the dining room, the upstairs hall. Only the kitchen remains illuminated. There, beneath the rooms photographed for magazines, workers wash the final glasses and prepare the house to look effortless again. This was how America's filthy rich really lived in the 1950s. They lived in houses large enough to conceal entire systems. They moved through days softened by employees, protected by gates, organized by secretaries, and financed by industries spread far beyond the horizon. They experienced freedom from ordinary inconvenience, but not freedom from fear, loneliness, illness, family conflict, or time. They could control temperature, distance, access, labor, and appearance. They could not fully control love, loyalty, history, or change. Their parties dazzled. Their fortunes shaped cities. Their foundations built institutions. Their companies employed millions. Their prejudices reinforced barriers. Their servants carried invisible burdens. Their children inherited both privilege and expectation. The great estates were not merely homes, they were maps of American power. Every front staircase and service stair told the same national story from opposite directions. One carried guests toward display, the other carried labor toward invisibility. Much of that world has vanished, but its foundations remain. Former estates survive as museums, campuses, hotels, clubs, and subdivisions. Family names remain on universities, hospitals, galleries, foundations, and towers. Collections once enjoyed privately now hang before public crowds. The servants are gone from the rooms, but the social distance they represented did not disappear. It changed uniforms. Today's fortunes move through private aircraft, secured compounds, family offices, foundations, luxury towers, and digital networks, rather than only through marble mansions and formal dining rooms. Technology has accelerated service, but it has not eliminated the workers behind it. A button is pressed, a car arrives, a message is sent, food appears, a house is cleaned while the owner is away. The promise of effortless life remains one of wealth's strongest illusions. The 1950s rich perfected that illusion inside estates, surrounded by lawns and walls. Their world appeared calm because conflict had been moved behind doors. It appeared elegant because labor had been trained not to interrupt the view. But history eventually enters every gate. It arrives through taxes, protest, inheritance, demolition, scandal, and memory. It opens service corridors. It asks who prepared the dinner, who built the fortune, who was excluded from the club, who cleaned the room, and who was allowed to inherit the future. The answers remain inside the surviving houses. They wait in narrow staircases, worn kitchen floors, staff bedrooms, hidden bells, locked gates, and photographs carefully composed to show everything except the people who made the scene possible. Look at the mansion long enough, and the silence begins to speak. Behind the marble facade, behind the chandeliers and swimming pools, behind the Cadillacs, couture gowns, private aircraft, silver trays, and perfect lawns, the real story of wealth was never simply about having more. It was about commanding time. It was about deciding who waited and who was never required to wait. It was about turning work into invisibility, influence into access, inheritance into authority, and inequality into beauty. For one brilliant post-war decade, America's richest families seemed to live beyond the reach of ordinary life. But they were not beyond history. No one ever is.